So Francois Hollande, the French president, was in Washington, D.C. Yesterday to meet with his American counterpart, Barack Obama, to get a more robust response from the United States in the fight against ISIS. After the attacks that struck Paris on November 13th, Francois Hollande announced a ramping up of the French strike against ISIS, especially in Raqqa, the self-proclaimed capital of ISIS. And he said that he would try to gather an international coalition, including Washington and Moscow, in the fight against the Islamic State. Now, obviously, this is going to be very complicated for Hollande for two reasons. The first reason is that the French have been privately frustrated with the lack of U.S. involvement in the Syrian crisis. I mean, the Europeans feel that the United States does not want to get dragged into a new Middle East conflict, and we've seen this 2 years ago with the famous episode of the Red Line on the use of chemical weapons by Bashar al-Assad against his own population. The French president had already given orders to the French jets to strike Syria alongside U.S. forces and learn at the last minute of Obama's about-face. And now that Europe becomes a new front of the Syrian civil war with the flow of refugees and the terrorist strikes that have been striking Paris, but also threatening Germany and Brussels these last few days, Europeans are expecting a larger involvement from the United States. Now, the second trip takes him to Moscow, which is much more delicate. I don't think there's much illusion in Paris over what can be achieved with President Putin in the fight against ISIS. Hollande is under domestic pressure to reach out to Vladimir Putin, especially from the conservative opposition, who sees the Russian president as a potential option, especially in the face of a lack of U.S. Involvement. So Hollande will be on Thursday in Moscow to try to see what he can get from Putin. But we have two major disagreements with Vladimir Putin over this. The first one is obviously the fate of President Bashar al-Assad. The French have been very forceful from the start of this crisis in 2011 in saying that a political transition without Assad in Syria was the only path forward to stabilize the situation and fight against the rise of radical Islamist groups that have been allowed by the repression from the regime. And even though Hollande has now said that his priority was the fight against ISIS, that doesn't change the broader picture for the French authorities. At the end of the day, this cannot be solved without a political solution that will include the ouster of President Assad. And obviously, everything that the Russians have been doing in Syria is more oriented towards shoring up the regime of Assad than fighting ISIS. And that's the second difference. The second difference is that most of the strikes that the Russians have been undertaking in Syria have been targeted at other targets than other groups than ISIS, such as the Free Syrian Armies and other rebel groups that are a bigger threat to the survival of the regime in Damascus than ISIS. The Russians have ramped up strikes against ISIS since the terrorist attack in Sharm el-Sheikh, and this is sort of what the French will be trying to feel tomorrow. I mean, is there the room for better coordination against ISIS with the Russians? But I think they're under no illusion that they will get anywhere. So, I mean, the key issue for Europeans is first to get their act together in improving coordination on intelligence, security, fight against terror at home, and that's what the French authorities have been trying to push their European partners to do in Germany or in Brussels, as well as in England, and have better coordination, especially on border control, the external borders of the European Union. But the second key issue for Europeans will be a stronger involvement from the United States, because there is a risk that they will only see Russia as the only remaining alternative, despite all the differences of analysis and objectives that we have with Moscow.